Recorded live at Talks and Tasting Studios, it's the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you what's behind the collar. Let's go.
From the Talks and Tasting Studios, this is the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you
what's behind the collar.
This is Bollhagen.
This is Berg.
This is Vicar.
And Peter's here.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah, how's it going, Berg?
We're just living the dream.
It's so nice and hot today. Heat advisories. Oh, I love it.
That's great. I'm glad.
How about you, Berg? You in hot weather? I imagine, Peter, it's steamy there.
No, actually, we had thunderstorms this morning, and it's been a cool, 70, 75 degrees here today? Yeah,
not bad.
72 degrees. It's supposed to get it, and then tonight it's supposed to be a low of 47, which is great. Open all the windows. Then it gets up into the 80s, kind of the low 80s for this next week. So
it's like Florida here in a bad way.
I've been in Florida where it's just you walk outside and it feels like you're hitting a wall of just hot moisture.
Yeah.
And then you go to the Gulf to go swimming.
You guys make me want to go on vacation.
And it's just like bath water. Ugh.
My wife's family lives in Florida, and when we'd go visit, like in February or something, it would be so nice to get off the plane and you walk outside and it just feels wet for the first time in like 4 months. So look at the bright side.
Yeah. I like the ocean water so warm you can't tell if you just peed or not.
And it doesn't matter because it's the ocean.
That would be your speed, you know? It's like that movie Moana says, right? Fish pee in you.
All right, before we have to do our top 12 list. So this time, I was kind of doing like because I really write mine like 5 minutes before the show. And I had a book on my desk that, inside joke, but he laughed at it. And he said, "Oh, it reminds you of this book. It reminds me of this book. It reminds me of this book." But there might be a listener, too, who know about this book that I have that I lovingly call the Vicarage Manual. So our Speed 12 list today is brought to you by Vicar, and this is Vicar's reading list.
I'd call it my awkward reading list, but sure.
All right. Peter, play the intro.
Enough nonsense. It's time for Bollhagen's Top 12.
Number 12.
Toilet paper origami. Delight your guests with fancy folds and simple surface establishments.
Number 11.
Everything I learned about women, I learned from my tractor.
10.
You're sharp enough to be your own surgeon.
9.
How to bowl better using self-hypnosis.
8.
Stray shopping carts of North America.
7.
Walmart Atlas of North America.
7.
Does God ever speak through cats?
6.
Street sword, a practical use of the long blade for self-defense.
5.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Okay. Wait a minute.
Well, to get them good.
Let me get back. We can circle back.
Okay, go.
Reusing old graves.
4.
The Bible cure for irritable bowel syndrome.
3.
No, there's an elongated
more.
title.
Oh, my bad.
Ancient truths, natural remedies, and latest findings for your health today.
All right. 2.
Collectible spoons of the Third Reich.
1.
Everything I want to do is illegal.
That's awesome.
There's a lot more where this came from, too.
Yeah, this is part 1.
Wow. Okay.
All right.
So, Berg, one of the which ones?
Let me just say first of all that all of these are available on Amazon. At least I don't know if they're actively in print, but you might be able to find them used. So these are all real, and they are written by real people.
So which one? You want to talk about the swords, Berg?
Yeah. So are we talking like a walking blade, like a sword and a cane sort of
like
thing, or
just a sword, like a long blade. I mean, I don't own this book. I would like to, but there's other things I should probably spend money on. But the cover of it is a guy who looks like he would have an interest in swords, who also lives in his mother's basement, holding a sword over his shoulder, just like a plain old sword. So I guess somewhere on this planet, there's a guy walking around concealed carrying a sword.
I mean, let's be honest, that it would be so much cooler to have like a cane. You're walking around, feeling pretty aristocratic. You get mugged, you pull out a sword.
Yeah, yeah, there he is.
Yeah,
So,
Peter had him pulled up there.
Yeah, the the blurb on the book at the end here. Street Sword will give you a framework in which to use the sword as a functional, practical weapon in today's violent world.
Practical.
Quickly providing an understanding of the simple physics involved, as well as the concepts like timing and distance.
I should have clicked on your link here when you put it up, because
All right, Peter. What I want you to do is, as a producer, because you're not actually doing double duty with your actual job today, are you?
No, not today.
That you'd ever. Okay. Could you, while we do this, just pause once in a while when you get bored and intersperse an Amazon review of that book?
Oh, an Amazon. Okay, that'd be great. All right, that could be good.
Hopefully there are some.
Oh, you don't think so?
Oh, okay. Next question. Collectible spoons from the Third Reich?
Yeah, man.
Please, what?
I mean, I'm just the messenger who's informing you that these books exist. I'm
Right.
not here to.
I used to play
Yeah.
spoons as a kid. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's people who collect. I mean, there's people who collect everything: stamps from different periods, spoons from different periods, apparently. So let me ask you, why not spoons of Germany during World War II?
Well, first of all, where did the metal come from? I mean, there's lots of. Yeah.
But the one I want to know more about is reusing old graves, because that book didn't have any subtitle or explanation on the cover. So I want to know what that's about.
Oh, a twofer.
Well, it makes sense, in places like New Orleans and that sort of thing.
True.
Right?
Yeah. Well, technically, I mean, wasn't the biblical practice of burial a temporary tomb?
Yeah, during the time of Jesus, they would use ossuaries, right?
Right. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, you know me. But the other thing, too, in Germany, I guess you rent your grave, and if you, after, for 75 or 80 years, and if you don't have any family to, rent it again, they actually dispose of you and re-rent it, and they put your gravestone around the cemetery. So
how long has that been going on for in Germany?
Oh, I don't know, but it makes it really hard to go visit some of these theologians, because once again, you're dealing with a limited amount of space for cemeteries. So
someone could theoretically, not me, but someone theoretically could write a book, Displaced Graves of the Third Reich or something, right?
You could. I wouldn't let the seminary know about it.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should talk about what we're preaching on, because Vicar and I are preaching on the same text, because I have the vacancy. So,
Yep.
and I can never bring myself to preach a Vicar sermon.
The gospel is from Luke 17, where Jesus cleanses the 10 lepers. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee, and as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Rise and go your way, your faith has made you well.
All right. That's kind of a classic text for a vicar's first sermon, right? So, Vicar, you're preaching.
Yes.
What are you preaching on?
I am preaching on that the true need was not any sort of cleansing from a disease or to meet any earthly need of wealth or possessions. That's kind of, an application. But the true need that the one leper recognized who turned back was that he needed the forgiveness of sins, not merely so his body could be cleansed of this one disease in this life and then die like the other 9 would, but so that his body would actually be raised on the last day.
Yeah. You got any thoughts, Berg? You always have
keep
thoughts.
going.
I also, there's a number of other textual observations I had that didn't make it into the sermon, but I could talk about some of them here since I can't really geek out in the sermon as much.
Yeah.
As you should.
Yeah.
Geek out for our audience.
So there's the obvious thing of go and show yourselves to the priests, and I've heard some argue that with the word in Greek coming and going being the same in Greek, he's actually calling them to come to himself. Obviously, Christ is the true priest, which is why the one returned, but the priest is plural, so I do think he's still upholding the law until the proper time and showing them to be cleansed. The other aspect of that is because the one hadn't yet gone to the priest and actually be declared cleansed, even though he is cleansed, Christ is coming into contact with an unclean, one who is still technically unclean according to the law, and being exposed to him. And with the aspect of him prostrating and falling on his face, you see that a lot, like in Isaiah, when Isaiah is in the throne room, which is the presence of God, and he, falls on his face in fear. And also in Revelation, John does the same thing. He falls on his face during certain points in the book where God is present. So now he's giving thanks to God in the flesh, and this is the presence of God that was veiled in the temple and that some of the prophets were being able to see. Now in Christ, those who come to him for the forgiveness of sins actually are able to enter in and witness his glory, which I think that glory theme is something that you might be able to pick up on for a sermon, because he returns to give glory, to offer glory to God, right? And so God's glory isn't, it isn't simply the weightiness of his presence per se, but the glory that God receives is actually when a sinner repents, God is glorified. So it's kind of like this, reversal of the high and mighty is actually, the glory of God is actually something quite humble in a way. Another thing I don't like, now maybe someone who knows how this word is used in, I don't know, maybe it's in the Septuagint or in secular Greek texts, but the word that's translated here as foreigner is allogenes. So I wish that they translated it in a very literalistic sense here, because, think of it this way. Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this otherborn? And Christ is the monogenes, he is the sole begotten. And now this is the one, the other begotten not from Israel, like the 9 lepers were, but begotten as a Gentile. Now he's born from above. And I think that's kind of the significance of him being a Samaritan, is it's unexpected that he is not only the foreigner is coming, but the otherborn is coming, who they aren't, who the ones you might expect to be aren't. And there's also this irony that, the Samaritans didn't recognize what the true place of worship was, because they still worshipped on a mountain, whereas the Hebrews worshipped, in the tabernacle or in the temple where God's presence and his glory actually was. So now there's this reversal and this irony that the Samaritan, who theoretically, historically, they haven't recognized where the presence of God actually is, Now he's the one that recognizes the presence of God among his people in the flesh. So that's what I have, more or less.
It kind of reminds me of probably a frustration that you might have sometime. And let me explain. As someone who didn't grow up Lutheran, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever get frustrated when you talk with Lutherans who've been Lutherans your whole life, and then you think, like, don't you realize what you have?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah. Or just sometimes how it seems like everybody knows everyone else, and like I'm a little bit of an outsider. But yeah.
Well, you know what? This is a first step. Like, because, well, you're on a podcast that goes worldwide.
Yep.
And two, you're in Hampton, right? You're part of this national brotherhood.
Yeah.
I had a picture of a couple of vicars bumping into each other in the wild. When that happens, they always send me a picture. Kind of fun. I think you're good. Your sermon is done, and I'm preaching on it, and I haven't done a thing yet. So
nice. Well, one other thing that I think it kind of comes up in the sermon, but it's not like the main point, is the kind of the theme of the text of separation. Because obviously when you're a leper, you're separated out from everyone else. And so the 9 go back wanting to be reunited with their people, with the nation of Israel. And again, the Samaritan is recognizing the true need of being reunited with God in Christ. And because of that, he actually, I'm sure eventually he goes and shows himself to the priest. But in this text, he doesn't go back. So in a way, he's reunited to God, but he's still separated out from everyone else as one who is forgiven and regenerate. There's something distinct about him.
Very good, Vicar.
At the simultaneous moment that he submits to the law and goes to the place in Jerusalem that his people didn't recognize, as he's on this way, he's given healing, and in that way he transcends the ceremonial law and he sees the true priest. Because that's the thing, is that the priests couldn't make you clean.
They just declared you clean.
Yep, they declared you clean, which is, yeah. So that'd be something fun to play with as well. I've always thought about writing the 9 different reasons why they didn't come back.
Yeah. I got the title of the book. Helping the leper to know God.
There you go.
All right. Very good. And let's move on. I got my top 12 list.
Peter, play the intro.
Enough nonsense. It's time for Bollhagen's Top 12.
All right. So I've been busy. I would like to say I gave this a lot of thought.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, you did.
Bear with me. Yeah, so, my topic, top 12 thoughts that I have when talking about faith and science. Why do you think that's important, Berg? Faith and science.
Because the two are often pitted against one another.
Right. And how about you as a young man, Vicar, going through college, and I'm sure you hear a lot of discussions on this topic. Do you think it's an important topic to think about what is the relationship between the two?
Yes, I do, especially since Christians are so often pegged as being anti-science among, the world.
Right. And I think we probably have some scientists actually who listen to this show, which we are not. So if you are a listener and you want to comment on this, help us, give us some insight as a scientist, Vicar, where can they get a hold of us?
You can email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/clericalerrorspodcast. We have a Twitter.
At me, bro.
At clericalerrorsp, P for podcast. And we have a Patreon at patreon.com/clericalerrorspodcast.
And by the way, Vicar, do you remember when we gave you assignment that you'd have to write a haiku for every Patreon?
I do remember that. I don't remember agreeing to it, but I remember that being discussed.
Yeah, agreeing. You are a vicar, so.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the haiku was supposed to be on?
I think it was of their choosing, so we'll have to ask. We got a new Patreon member, so we'll have to ask what they want the haiku to be about.
Just give me a little, yeah.
Since
give
we're
me enough
already
of a heads
being
up.
lazy and leaning on you for all our content today. All right. So this is so I'm talking about faith and science and how those relate to each other. Something that deserves, 8 minutes of me writing down thoughts. Right? Don't you agree?
Number 12.
The Bible is not necessarily meant to be a science book. So my point is the fact that the Bible obviously is inerrant.
And that means?
It's right without errors.
Okay.
Right? Verbal inspiration, right?
Verbal inspiration.
But at the same time, it is not necessarily there to explain all our unanswered questions.
So you're saying the Pythagorean theorem isn't found in Judges?
Correct. And you won't necessarily find, as Vicar wants to buy this book, the Bible's answer to irritable bowel.
Bummer.
Well, that's irritating.
Right?
But
I'm editing all sorts of jokes, by the way. So my point is that I think sometimes we can run into the idea of trying to super explain everything in a way that we have to make it all make sense from a scientific point of view.
So who falls into this error?
I do think maybe some of these errors could fall in, like, I hate to say it, like the Creation Museum sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of good stuff there, yet at the same time, sometimes I think it's presented as this is exactly how it happened. All these theories that is also portrayed as this is true as far as, the water chasm around the earth and all sorts of things that make it sound as though if you disagree with that theory, you're disagreeing with Bible. And so what can happen is, well, you have these theories on how the creation happened, what life was before the fall, or what life was before the flood, and how that explains everything. And it's good to do, understanding that may not completely explain it. So I think it's not unhelpful, but to portray it as in a way that this is at the heart of science, to explain how it happened, when the Bible really wasn't written for that. It was written to make us wise until salvation.
Yeah, I think one way that people can kind of maybe not fall into that error, but immediately connect to something that Scripture says to science. Like, for example, when I was raised Baptist, and without fail, anytime the creation account was discussed, evolution had to be discussed, right? Now, obviously, we believe that the earth was created in 6 days, as Genesis depicts. But, it's not as though Moses is sitting there writing this with Darwin's evolutionary theory in mind. He has his own reasons for recording this. He has his own intent and what he's trying to say about creation and about God. And so we should take it for what it is as such before immediately making like a contemporary application, if that makes sense.
Vicar, I have one question for you. How dare you?
How dare you? Would you like to explain your offense?
No.
Okay.
It was a joke. So
okay.
He said what was right.
Number 11.
Oftentimes, science is equated as being atheism, meaning we need to explain everything without God. And so it is presented in a way where we're going to explain things without God, which leads to we're going to explain things because there is no God. It is interesting how if you bring up religion, people might say, well, or bring up faith, they'll say, but I'm a scientist, or I'm a skeptic, which is interesting because most often when people say they're a skeptic in that sense, they're not a skeptic about all the other things that they buy. Like they're not a skeptic about the Big Bang Theory. They're not a skeptic about evolution. They're not a skeptic about any of those things. So it's interesting, but I think that is kind of something that, in a way, has been very damaging to a lot of Christians who like science because they've been told that you can't have those things in the same place. And those who do often do it poorly.
I mean, yeah, that and the way you phrase that sort of implies the necessity to define what science actually is, because it's not atheism. So, what is it? You can think of it. It's the observation of the natural order that God created. But I think also whether someone is Christian or atheist, I think if you were intellectually honest, you would have to say that science has its limitations and it's not going to provide these existential answers of what's, metaphysical or whatever. And like a perfect example of this is thermodynamics. The first two laws, energy, I might be doing them out of order, but energy cannot be created or destroyed. And the second, I believe, is energy always depreciates in what its value is. So the universe couldn't have always have existed as such because there wouldn't be any usable energy that exists. So therefore, what is there must have come from outside the universe because energy can't be created or destroyed. So then that's where you get all the bizarre theories of, there's a multiverse. And okay, well, what's the evidence for that? Is that really any more of faith than me saying, because energy cannot be created or destroyed, there must therefore be a creator? Do I have any, is an atheist any more or any less of someone who accepts things simply because that conforms with his worldview than they accuse us of being? I don't think so,
Another example is just the existence of life itself, where you will never really find, to those who really push evolution, an explanation of how supposedly in a mud puddle a living cell was organized.
Oh yeah, and they've claimed to do experiments of we've come remotely ballpark close to creating a certain amount of circumstances where such and such could happen, but all of those things would have to coincide at the exact same time, and it's such a remote possibility, even if it is a possibility.
Right. When you're talking about a living cell being more complicated than a coronavirus that still confuses us. Any comments on that, Berg?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of Christians upon whom science is built, right? That there are plenty of Christians who were famous scientists like Isaac Newton, Galileo, Michael Faraday, Francis Collins, Gregor Mendel, Robert Boyle, Francis Bacon, James Clerk Maxwell.
Number 10.
It's okay not to know. Meaning, just because you believe the Bible doesn't mean you have to explain everything and make sense of everything. Because on the other side of it, those who try to do it without the existence of God or without the Bible, they run with, it's okay for us to not know. It's there are certain things that we just don't know, and it's okay to say in your own, because it's one thing to make it when you're maybe arguing or having a discussion with someone, but also I think this is important for those who might be struggling with some of these on a personal level. It's okay to not know how it happens or to not be able to fully understand fossil record or things like that, because who can answer all those questions? Ultimately, it has to come down to faith and knowing what the Bible says.
Yeah, it's really, what is your epistemology?
Right.
How do you know what reality is?
Number 9.
Science and its relation to faith does matter because science does, in its attempt to talk about the origins of the world, does have to take on, in those contexts, theological conclusion. So, for example, according to science, how does it explain who man is as opposed to theology? How does it understand death as opposed to theology? When death occurred, when man got here, what is a man? What is a soul? And with that, then, can science explain what is sin? And science, what is a sin? If this is, in a sense, become, for people, a religion where we get all our answers, what does it have to say about those things? I think we're finding out right now what science says about those things, right? In some way, where science tries to tackle moral issues. Science isn't very good at that. I mean, go out to the Serengeti and see how animals treat each other.
Number 8.
Science, if it's honest, always questions. And when people say trust the science, that isn't actual science. Actually science. I think we've all heard that a lot, right? Trust the science as though it is a settled thing. Let's no longer talk about it. That actually isn't science at all.
Okay, so what do we call that when you say trust the science? Instead of science, we could call it
false belief.
How about scientism?
Scientism, there you go.
An exaggerated trust in the efficacy of the methods of natural science applied to all areas of investigation.
Scientism.
Number 7.
Don't mix testable, repeatable science with untestable origin science. What do I mean by that? So what kind of science, Vicar, do you think are helpful? Give some examples.
Medicine, engineering, botany.
Right. When we have all those type of sciences, what are you doing? You're testing, you're doing things, and you're showing how the natural world works. But there are times where that has nothing to do with the Big Bang or evolution, where they say, well, trust the science, you have to really, really put all your marbles in the evolution basket. And if you do, then they say, well, don't you trust the science? Don't you take medicine? Don't you use science all the time? All of a sudden you don't want science anymore? Which is really a false way of looking at it, because most of the things, when we talk about repeatable and testable, all of those things become more of what you believe rather than something you could actually prove. And whereas something like medicine, that's something you actually can observe what happens when certain things do happen. When it comes to all sorts of things, you can observe what happens without actually having to come up with some sort of epistemology of all those other things that they add to that. So you could actually believe in the creation and create good medicine. You could believe that God created the world and be a good meteorologist, biologist, Like, for example, how much evolution does that really play into what a doctor does? I don't think it at all, really. So, how much does the doctors? Well, because our hearts evolved this way, then we need to use this kind of medicine. That's not really a thing.
Or you'd be better off just dying because your genome sucks and you shouldn't be passing this on to your children.
Right. Right. Before you know it, they'll be collecting spoons in your honor.
That is the natural conclusion.
Right.
Isn't it?
Right. Evolution is so awesome, let's help it out a little bit.
Yeah.
So, all right.
I mean, don't you trust the science?
I do in my sweet Lexus. Point A to point B in luxury. Yeah. You've been in the Lexus, right?
Yep.
What do you think? Is that the nicest car you've ever been in?
No, but Has some of the nicest legroom.
Yeah. When it's clean, especially.
Yeah.
It's no
Yeah.
Aurora, though.
No.
Number 6.
We don't have to prove the Bible. Do we? No, I don't think so. Kind of speaks for itself. It's kind of the point, right? Doesn't mean that we can, use it to understand things better, but to say, like, we have to prove it is a little different.
Yeah, and I think we should also distinguish the difference between proving something versus providing evidence in support of something.
Right.
Yeah, because you can provide evidence of why it's reasonable to be a Christian and reasonable to believe the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a great many things that everyone takes for granted that you cannot intellectually, beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove to be true,
Such as?
Like, well, how do you know that your spouse loves you? Right? It's like, oh, well, she...
Okay.
Right.
Let's go a little bit more even.
Okay.
Let's pull a David Hume. You know who David Hume is, right?
Fox News contributor?
No.
No,
I mean, let's go full radical skeptic then, right?
All right.
Yeah. How do we know you don't know that you don't live in an illusion or something?
Right. I mean, isn't this what the Matrix is, right?
Yeah. Which it is a little concerning that how many people actually accept that as like a reasonable possibility.
But they don't. They might as an intellectual possibility, but you don't see people trying to jump off buildings and walk through walls.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you been on YouTube lately?
No, I haven't. But they can sure try it,
Yeah.
Or, people not believing in things like cause and effect or whatever. I mean, if we're going to go full skeptic, why should we trust our own senses? Our own senses deceive us all the time. Isn't that what mirages are? Isn't that what optical illusions are? I mean, if our senses are so easily manipulated, well,
Right.
This is why Kant had to come up with his world of appearances as opposed to the world of the noumena, or the things in and of themselves. If you want some philosophy, there you go.
We do.
Number 5.
Follow the money. And the reason I say that is science is really funded by what? Ultimately, like scientific research. By the government. Right?
Or by companies.
Right. Where there's a kind of a vested interest in what we actually study. And so if there are things that might be helpful to the Christian faith to study from a scientific point of view, guess what doesn't happen? They don't get funding, right? So I think it's important for Christians to be mindful of this,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, there are very few countries in the world that actually have double-blind tests, and one of them is Norway. And so that's where we should be very, very skeptical and suspicious of different products. I mean, isn't it amazing how we advertise all of these drugs online today?
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder why. I mean, the leftist rag known as the New York Times has said that that the FDA is saying that you can sell meat that is grown in a lab and not have to identify it as being grown in a lab. So you won't be able to, on the label, tell the difference between lab-grown meat and naturally grown meat. So, but trust the science. Nothing can possibly go wrong.
Yeah,
and this is where Resident Evil has entered the chat, and Terminator has entered the chat, and The Last of Us has entered the chat, and I don't know. Hasn't anybody watched dystopian movies here?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I gotta take a step back here, Berg. Last of Us and Resident Evil both started as games. Do you know them from the games or the media based on the games?
Both.
Okay.
How about, did you mention Fallout?
There's
I
another
love
good
Fallout.
one, Fallout. Yeah.
That is such a good TV show. I watched a little bit of the game on YouTube because I don't play games. My fingers don't work that way. I can maybe work Atari or Nintendo 64, but
Right.
that's about the extent of my
Reminds
my
me, I
gaming
used to,
abilities.
my morning ritual was to go get the newspaper and check the baseball scores and stats, and then play a little Atari.
Well, the thing is like,
Going to
We've
ride
got
with
a-
my BMX.
a college group, we get together every summer, and they always insist on playing Halo. And I'm just terrible. Like, it's the original Halo, but I can't play it. I try. I am the worst at it, so.
Hey, maybe I should try picking that up, Peter. What do you think?
Halo? Combat Evolved, the original?
Man, I get confused by Minecraft. I was confused watching you play Star Wars Lego Force Unleashed, man.
That's not a game, but
Probably
good
Vicar's
try.
jam back in the day. Was that your jam back in the day?
What?
Lego Star Wars.
No, that was about my era, but my parents wouldn't let us get like a gaming console. We did have a Super
Nice.
Nintendo, but because it was a hand-me-down, different. So I played a lot of Super Nintendo games, but nothing from my own time.
Some Super Mario World.
Nice.
Oh yeah, classic.
Some
Zelda, Link to the Past.
Monopoly.
No, I didn't play that.
Man, I am really good at Wii Sports. And I think of myself as good at Mario Kart. I'm good at Quiplash.
Number 4.
Science has been greatly benefited from Christian, and also, although while more modern downplays the role of Christianity, really, science, the way we understand it, was born in many ways out of Christianity, and on the same token, using it without the Christian faith outside of a set of morality can be very dangerous. It's kind of like what I talk about democracy. It works great amongst people who actually believe in the Bible or believe that there is a God, and but when it's separated from that, we're going to find out what that looks like, how beneficial it is. Much the same way, science for many, many years was done by whom ultimately? Monk, right? You're looking at me in a weird way, Vicar. What's going through your mind? Oh,
Nothing.
it must be.
Do you
the
have some
core.
more Christian, some Christians who are scientists? Because I can't say Christian scientists because those
Right.
people are cray-cray.
I don't know, man. You listed a whole bunch earlier.
Yeah, I listed a whole bunch. So, well, why do you think these other cultures and nations couldn't develop science? Because, I mean, think about it. The Chinese had gunpowder in, I want to say, the 2nd century AD, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what makes Christianity, like, what worldview makes Christianity different than these other places that were, scientifically more advanced?
I think Christianity brought a little level of education, meaning that a lot of the places and of institutions where you would learn was born out of the work of the church, so that they can train people who knew the Bible, and from that, a lot of the sciences were able to grow and flourish. Think of our own, like what are called our best universities, our most renowned. Like, how did they start?
Oh, the Concordias?
Or Harvard, right?
And how did they end?
Dun, dun, dun. But yes,
So,
Harvard started as a seminary school.
Right.
Well, I would say too, I mean, the big difference between Christianity and a lot of these other religions is that, Christianity has a creator that is separate from the creation. Like, it's not a blob God.
Right.
Where everything is God. I mean, this explains a lot of the lack of development in places like India, or, when Pure Land Buddhism and that sort of stuff gets into China, right? If this world is an illusion that you want to escape, then why in the world would you ever spend any time developing any sort of technology? At the same token, if this world is all that you have, like it was for Lamech's kids, then of course you're going to be very technologically advanced.
Right. And Christianity certainly can direct the aim of what you're trying to do with science. I think
my favorites are the Russian cosmists. They're like, let's just resurrect the dead.
We were all thinking that, Berg.
I think with Christianity, you see a respect, first of all, for the created order because God created it and it's good. We're not Gnostic. And also, on the other hand, Christianity recognizes the value of human life, both whether you're smart or dumb, whether you're rich or poor, that humanity in and of itself has intrinsic value, and therefore we should do what we can with what we have to support human life. And I think that also enabled things like medicine to be developed so profoundly.
Yeah, because to develop ways to help people feel better, I mean, in some way, that's almost Christ-like as he healed. I mean, the hospitals are started. When you think, even look in Africa, who are starting the hospitals, who are opening orphanages, who are seeking to find ways to help people. It's the church. So there's a desire and an emphasis of helping, directing science in a good way.
Number 2.
The more we study science, the more mysterious and the more we do not understand. So we get more questions, I believe, in science than we actually get answers. What do you think?
Yes. Give me an example.
Oh, okay. The human body.
Okay.
The more we study the human body and we try and fix something, guess what happens? We found out more. The more we try and have a medicine, the more we understand, there are some side effects here. I mean, that's one thing as a pastor you become keenly aware of, is just how many things can go wrong with the body. And when you try and fix it, how it makes more problems, how everything is related in ways of the body that people spend their life studying and they can't get it. I mean, while you find some answers, you actually find more questions and you find more things that you just don't know.
Like the appendix.
Yes.
The
because
appendix
we don't know what the
was,
appendix does, right?
Yeah, well, the appendix was once considered a vestigial organ, but this view has changed since the early 2000s. Research suggests that the appendix may serve an important purpose as a reservoir for beneficial gut bacteria. Boom.
There you go.
There's some science for you.
Right. Yeah, most of Vicar's favorite books have appendix.
Oh, yeah.
Ha!
And number 1.
Miracles, like the resurrection, are miracles simply because science cannot explain them, which makes it a miracle. Because science is based on imperfect human deductions and observations, and theology is based on the God who created that world. Theology is more perfect science.
Good work. I dare say the queen of the sciences.
All right.
After a long
Peter,
shift,
you have anything to add?
After a long shift at the Cold Stone Creamery, I was confronted by a man asking for all my tips, or else he'd take my life and 3 pints of cake batter ice cream partially melted. I sang tons of embarrassing songs that day for those tips and refused to give him my $8. Fortunately, it was Thursday, the day I typically carry my Katana Pro 19 series sword with me. I remembered the advice from Chapter 5, slicing up the other guy. With one swift motion, the threat became minced meat. Moments later, I turned on the news. Unfortunately, his picture was all over with the headline stating, "Cold-blooded killer on the loose." I was easily identified being one of the few people who walk around on the streets with a huge sword in public. Despite now having to serve a lot of time, this book is top 5 literature regarding street-safe, long-blade self-defense.
Why'd they put him in jail? That guy's awesome.
I've got another one. Thank you, Sensei. Now I know how to wield a gun in one hand and a katana in the other. I'll be sure to save some for the rest of you.
Okay.
I knew there would be some.
You did a good job. Nice list.
Any concluding comments, Berg, on the sword and science?
I want a sword in one hand and a laser blaster in the other.
What would your superhero name be?
I've always
been a big fan of the bearded
Can you do a
bard.
randomizer? You should do a
random.
Let's do a randomizer.
A randomizer for what?
Hero name randomizer. There is one. Okay.
Aren't you supposed to do the name of your first pet in the street you grew up on?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
What animal is your hero most like? What would you say? What animal is?
We do. All right. Is it
a Wolverine?
Okay, a Wolverine.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Nationality, American. Yeah. All right. Let's just write me some hero names. Okay. Here's one. Robert Moore, a.k.a. Dr. Stout. Joshua Brown, a.k.a. Stout Wolverine. Joseph White, a.k.a. Wolverine Man. Matthew Martinez, a.k.a. Stout Man. Daniel Collins, a.k.a. Robust Man. James Roberts, a.k.a. Captain Robust. Michael Phillips, a.k.a. Fat Man. So
Solomon Boyer, a.k.a. Professor Sensible.
There we go.
Nothing denoted lasers and swords, though.
No, nothing did. So I saw a T-shirt that had a bear on it, with kind of the Japanese deal around his head with a sword. And he's like, while you were all hibernating, I learned the blade.
I studied the blade.
Yes. I was also listening to another podcast, Strange Studies of Strange Stories, and I was listening to Mutant Bear Month. So it was 4 weeks of awesome mutant bear stories. It was great.
I don't know where to go from here.
So,
hey, I think the show's done, man. Unless you guys have something else you want to talk about.
No. No.
You don't want to hear about mutant bears anymore?
No. Yeah. My energy stores are a little bit lower right now.
Boo.
All right, how about this then? Let's come up with homework. What's something that doesn't take much time that we can come back with next week for some content?
I've got my translations. I got quotes. We could talk about Frankenstein, the novel. And the educational plan that the monster undergoes.
Everybody has to come up with a superhero identity for a Bible character.
Superhero identity for a Bible character. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So instead of King David, instead of Clark Kent who becomes Superman, we got King David who becomes something.
That makes sense.
And if we forget, listener, sorry.
There we go.
All right.
There we go. We got a cliffhanger for next week.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. This is Bollhagen.
This is Berg.
This is Vicar.
And may you have swords on the streets.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Questions, thoughts, concerns? You can contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/Clerical Errors Podcast, on Twitter at Clerical Errors P for podcast, or email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. Thanks for listening to Clerical Errors. See you next time.